Before we get into the colored pages in your packet, let me just say a few words of report. I was invited last year, I was Bishop John's clergy appointee to the committee, and when he emailed me to ask if I would do that, I just emailed back 2 words, do what? Did you hear my arm cracking as he twisted it? Really? Serving the Lord's always a privilege. In this diocese, it's a double privilege because it's such a joy. I have to say that in the year just gone, I learned a lot about the Constitution and the Canons. I operate under a kindergarten teacher's style of thinking, so I want to say Canons and then Constitution because it's alphabetical. All right? I met some incredibly gifted and faithful folks, had great time sitting around the table talking about all the nert things that go into governing our life together and making sure that our life together remains solidly grounded in Christ, well-ordered, and pleasant. There were wonderful folks on the committee. If Bishop John comes twisting your arm this year via email or call, say yes. Just because it's such a delight to sit together with other godly men and women and talk about things that are of importance in this diocese. Fine folks that are faithful stewards of the documents that have grown to govern our life together, brilliant, devoted followers of Christ. And I don't know how many members of the committee are here, but if they're here, anybody that's here, could you stand? Is there anybody else in the room from the committee? There are. Again, just wonderfully gifted and grace-filled folks that are wonderful to have conversation with. And do the work that sometimes nobody really wants to do. Now on to the business at hand. The committee met 4 times between April and August, and we waded our way through numerous suggestions for tweaks and changes to the Constitution and canons. We spent a significant amount of time discussing a resolution from last year's Synod 2015, resolution number 2 in the numbering of last year's proposals. This was the proposed amendment of Canon 3, Section 6, having to do with the training of those carrying out lay ministries. You heard Bishop John mention this earlier in his address. It was the consensus of the committee after consulting with Tom Herrick and talking with clergy in the diocese who had opinions to offer about the topic. It was the consensus of the committee, and it remained the consensus the entire time, that the best avenue for implementing training for lay ministries is by encouraging and providing for the sharing of resources and training opportunities. And we had one opportunity today over lunch session with Mary Hayes, and I'm sure there will be many other opportunities to come. We have no plans to bring that resolution back to Synod at this time. Looking at the things for this year, we have 4 proposed amendments. One is an amendment to the Constitution, and the other 3 are amendments to the canons. So if you'll find in your packet the colorful sheets of paper, we have light purple, sky blue, grassy green, and sunshine yellow. There you go, if you could find those, please. Starting with the light purple, the one that is labeled Proposed Constitutional Amendment Number 1, Article 7, Section 2. Let's begin by looking at the note that's at the bottom of the page. Please note that because this is a constitutional amendment, it is governed by a different set of regulation and rule than the rest of the amendments that we'll consider. Just reading from the bottom of the page, partway through that paragraph under the note, it says, this Constitution, that's the DOMA Constitution, may be amended by a 2/3 vote at any annual meeting of the Synod, provided that each amendment must also be approved by a majority of each orders, that would be lay and clergy, total delegates present at the meeting. If approved, the amendment shall lie over to the next annual meeting of the Synod. If approved again in the same form by a 2/3 vote of the Synod and a majority of each order's total delegates present at the meeting, the Constitution shall then stand amended as proposed. To boil that all down, it means that we get to look at this year, and if it passes this year, then we would look at it again next year. That said, looking at the current text, this proposed amendment to the Constitution has to do with what happens at the disability or impermissible absence of a bishop. In the current text, the underlined portion in that first paragraph is what we're looking to change. As it stands right now, it reads, "In such case, the bishop coadjutor, if there is one, or the bishop suffragan shall take charge until the standing committee with the consent of the archbishop declares the bishop restored. If there be neither a bishop coadjutor nor bishop suffragan, the standing committee shall serve as the ecclesiastical authority of the diocese until the standing committee with the consent of the archbishop declares the bishop restored." If you've glanced at the rationale, you'll see that the rationale for the change that's in the next paragraph has to do with the definition of a suffragan bishop. A suffragan bishop should not be included as one who would automatically take charge in the case of disability or impermissible absence of a bishop, because unlike a bishop coadjutor who is elected with the right of succession to the current bishop, a suffragan bishop is elected to assist in the episcopal affairs of the diocese without the automatic right of succession. So in correcting that language, the proposed text reads, "In such case, the bishop coadjutor," and we've left out this time the suffragan bishop, "shall take charge until the standing committee with the consent of the archbishop declares the bishop restored. If there be no bishop coadjutor, the standing committee shall be the ecclesiastical authority of the diocese. In consultation with the archbishop, the standing committee may select a bishop suffragan or assistant bishop of the diocese if either exists, or another bishop of the province as acting bishop. This bishop will function as that ecclesiastical authority of the diocese until the standing committee, with the consent of the archbishop, declares the bishop restored."
Are there questions on this matter? Clear? Ready to vote? It's been brought to us by committee. It doesn't need to be moved or seconded. All in favor say, we need to vote by orders.
Yes.
So I'll ask first for clergy only to vote. All clergy in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Clergy opposed? Lay delegates in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Laity opposed? Motion is carried. We'll vote on it a second time next year.
There we go. Okay, looking now to the sky blue page. This is the second proposed amendment to the canons, remembering that we did the first one this morning. This is an amendment to Title 1A, Canon 4, Section 1. The title is Officers of the Diocese. If you look at the proposed text to be inserted at the end of Section 1, the proposal is to add this paragraph, or this few sentences. "The bishop, with the consent of the standing committee, may appoint from the existing bishops of the province one or more assistant bishops. The bishop shall prescribe the duties and responsibilities of each assistant bishop." In the current language of our canons, there is no provision for the appointment of an assistant bishop. That is an accepted practice in the Anglican world at large, and it's something that could be of benefit to the current bishop or any bishop in the future who would be the diocesan.
Is that clear? an assistant bishop has to be an existing bishop. In other words, you're not bypassing the diocese electing its own bishop, but it's in this movement, it's not uncommon to have someone who retires and still has energy and miles on the tires. I mean, famously, Bishop Dave Benna personifies that ability to keep on serving, and this just provides a hitherto not available provision for putting a bishop like that in a formal role as an assistant bishop of the diocese. Any further questions about that? Ready to vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Okay, moving on to the grass green sheet. This is the third proposed amendment to the Canons, Title 1A, Canon 5, Section 4B. This is also the sheet on which, although it says proposed text changes are underlined, there's a whoops here because they're not. The current title reads Sources and Contents of Nominations. One of the proposed changes is to simply change that to Submission of Nominations. This proposed amendment has to do with shortening the number of days before Synod where nominations can be received or submitted to the nominations committee when it comes to the election of a bishop. In the current language, we read that it is required that there be not less than 210 days prior to the electing synod for nominations from vestries, and from nominations from other sources, not less than 180 days prior to the electing synod. The proposed change is simply to reduce those numbers by 30 days each, so that we would be saying not less than 180 days prior to the electing synod in the case of nominations for bishop received from vestries, and not less than 150 days prior to the electing synod for nominations coming from other sources. And again, the rationale at the bottom is simply that 180 days is about 6 months. That seemed to be long enough for the nominating committee to then vet and do what they need to do to prepare that final list of candidates for the diocese and the House of Bishops to consider. And the same with 150 days. So it's a shortening of a time frame.
Any questions? Yes, Steve?
Just as a point of information, what other sources can a nomination come from?
Individuals,
Yeah.
both within and from outside the diocese. There's generally open solicitation. I think the implication of the original drafting of the canons was that they wanted to give particular honor to vestry nominations. But if people realize, well, if my vestry's not putting in this name, then I still have a window where I could nominate that person myself. I think that was the thinking on that. Patrick?
This only applies to ordinary bishops and bishop coadjutors, right? This is the election of bishops, not the appointment.
It's not. It doesn't relate to assistant bishops who are appointed. It relates only to bishops who are elected.
Or new suffragans.
Well, any suffragan is, but yes, bishops as they are elected. Correct. Ready to vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Done. Becki?
Okay, and the last page, the sunshine yellow page, proposed amendment number 4, dealing with Title 1, Canon 5, Section 4C, titled Screening of Nominations. You'll see partway through that top paragraph, which is the original language, there's a part that is stricken through. All candidates currently serving a congregation or mission of the province shall have written support by the vestry of such congregation or mission. In other words, it was a requirement for a person to stand for election as bishop, for their name to be submitted, that they needed to have the written support of their vestry if they were serving in a parish setting. It is the thinking of the committee that that language was placed there because there was the distinct possibility when the canons were drafted that the diocesan bishop might be a person serving as a clergy person in a parish and would continue serving in some capacity in that parish. The current model of ministry is for the diocesan bishop to serve full-time in his parish, and his current vestry should not have veto whether or not his name is placed into nomination. So in the proposed text, we've simply taken out that sentence that was stricken through in the original language, removing that provision.
In other words, if someone was going to be a bishop rector, the vestry needed to have a say in that. But since this is now a full-time job, it's not that requirement doesn't really hold in the current circumstance. But questions? Yes. Nicholas?
So this sort of presumes that we don't anticipate the position, I don't want to say devolving, but we don't anticipate it being a dual cure.
Correct. I would certainly testify it's a full-time gig. I was a bishop rector for 3 years, and it ate me out of house and home, so I would not suggest that we consider going back. Ready to vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Done. Becki, thank you very much, and
Yeah,
thanks
thank
to your
you.
committee.
Absolutely.
Great job.